Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by visiting Adjunct Professor at the Wits School of Governance, former DG of Water Affairs, and National Planning Commissioner, Professor Mike Muller. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I'm not sure where to start here. I mean, how did we get to this situation in Nelson Mandela Bay? Is this a train that we saw coming in the distance and just didn't do enough to alter the course?
Yes, good evening, Peter, and to your viewers. I'm afraid, this is one where we can simply look at the records and say, hey, this was a city that in 2005 said we're going to need more water. These dams aren't going to be enough. That said, in about 2008, we really must connect up to the Fish River through this Nooit Gedacht scheme, which has got water coming from the Orange River. There's a large amount of water there, but it wasn't done. And I'm afraid that many of the water problems in the country are actually not about shortage of water. They're about the people responsible, and I'm afraid this is usually the municipalities, who are told what's necessary and they just choose to do something else. So I'm really sorry for the people of Nelson Mandela Bay who are suffering this, but this actually has been on the table since 2005, and this wasn't outside people. This was the city's own reports about what they needed to do, and they just didn't do it. So I'm afraid they're now living the consequences.
Just how dangerously low are we in terms of water levels? I mean, they talk about things like day zero. Is there a serious threat that could actually be reached, or will the Gerib Dam save the day?
Well, the Gerib Dam is absolutely full. We've had very good rains in most of the country, and there is water there reserved for Nelson Mandela Bay. So really, I would like to think that we're going to see some resolution. But the trouble is, the water from Gerib comes to Nooit Gedacht. It's on one side of the city. They've still got to build pipelines to take it across to the other side of the city. There's a lot of work to be done. But it's not a water problem, Peter. This is actually a governance problem, people not doing the right things at the right time. And, the population suffers. We must be very clear. We also must be very careful not to blame everything on climate change. Climate change is turning into a very useful excuse for politicians and city managers who don't do their job properly.
If we start doing the right things, have we got time?
Let's move away from Nelson Mandela Bay, because this is a long saga, and I don't want to be too rude about them. So let's look at some of the other places. In Gauteng, we're actually doing okay. The Lesotho Highlands Water Project is late, but at least they've awarded the contracts and have started building. By 2027, 2028. There will be extra water for that entire region. That doesn't mean to say that if there's load shedding and all the pumps stop, that everyone's going to get water. But that won't be a water problem. That will be a power problem, an electricity problem, and it can be solved, and it shouldn't lead to a total crisis. I'm really much more worried about the smaller places. There are municipalities which have completely collapsed and simply stopped providing water. The Northwest province is full of them, and what do people in a dry province like the Northwest do if their municipality just stops doing its work, takes the money, pays salaries to its friends, and doesn't provide water? We are going to have to find ways in which national government can actually move into municipalities and say, move over, you've had your chance. We'll take over the money, thank you. We'll appoint people to do the work, but we can't allow you to just leave your entire population without water at all. And so a town like Lichtenburg, which has lost a whole lot of employment because they couldn't provide water to the cheese factory, is repeated over and over again in different places in South Africa. And those are the ones we should, I think, really be worried about now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about where the authority should lie in terms of national resources such as water. I've got my own thoughts about education and health, but water certainly should be something that is a national asset rather than being left to the mercy of local authorities?
Yes, well, I'm feeling very old now because about 25 years ago, actually probably more like 30 years ago, when the Constitution was negotiated, there was a lot of talk about that, and it was agreed that the water resource, the water in the rivers and underground, is a national competence, and happily national government is still responsible for it. But there were a lot of people who wanted to avoid having national government having too much control. They wanted local delegation. I say it was the original sunset clause. Local government was given a huge autonomy and protection in the Constitution. And we're, I'm afraid, living with the consequences of that. At some point, and I think it's happening at the moment, national government is going to have to say to the municipalities that are failing, look, you've had 20 years to try and get this right. You're not making it work. We're afraid that you're not competent to take this important responsibility of water supply. Now let's please hand it to someone who can do it. And that could be all sorts of people. It could be a water board. It could even be private contractors. It could be an association of municipalities. There are a few examples, but we can't carry on letting this vital service just be at the mercy of some little gang of crooked councillors, to be crude, that just take the money and don't do any work with it.
Professor Mike Muller, I wish we could talk for longer, but thanks so much indeed for giving us some food for thought over this issue. Thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure. Good night.
Good night. That's Professor Mike Muller, Wits School of Governance, Adjunct Professor there and a former DG of Water Affairs. And he says that we've got water. The problem is water management.